What's going on, guys? Simple Sports back again with another video. Week number 2 is in the books for the NFL, and I'm going to give my recap of the weekend. I'm going to do these on Tuesdays from now on because I do want to recap the Monday night game, although I do miss the Monday when everyone else is doing it. So I think maybe in the future I'll do Mondays for the Sunday games, and then Tuesday will be the Monday night game, even though personally I'd rather do them all in one shot. But neither here nor there. Point being, let's get it started. Pretty good, solid week 2. First 2 weeks have been pretty meh. There have been a couple of good games, but for the most part, they've all been pretty kind of meh. This past weekend has been pretty good. Got a couple of good games coming up this week. My Titans are playing the Seahawks, which is going to be a real test for them. They had a real test like this early last year against the Broncos, and I actually picked them to lose that game, and they actually won it pretty, not convincingly, but they won the game, but they also won it in better fashion than I thought it would be. So I'm not as concerned this year about the Seahawks, although obviously their team is really, really good. But I'm not fearful of them like I was going into the Broncos game last year. But that's just one of the many games coming up next week. But let's talk about yesterday and Sunday. So actually, we go all the way back to Thursday. So first game, Texans and the Bengals. Boy, two things. The Texans looked bad, although to be fair, especially with Watson at quarterback, they were playing on a short week with a rookie who essentially had 2 to 3 days to prepare for the Bengals, on top of travel and a day off and all this other stuff. So, good job on their behalf getting the win. The Bengals looked like garbage, and I think it's time for a whole new identity. I think the coach needs to go. I think Andy Dalton needs to go. Maybe even the GM needs to go. I don't know, but I think the GM and I think the owner is the GM, so that's not going to happen. But he definitely needs to hire someone to be the GM because they have a nice collection of talent on the team, and a lot of people think they're the most talented, just man per man team in the NFL. But man, they looked terrible. They couldn't do anything. Bills and the Panthers. Didn't watch the game. I'm only going to really talk about the games I watched. I did watch the highlights. Nothing exciting there. It was a 9-3 game, pretty meh game. Bucks and the Bears, again, didn't watch that one. Bucks in the highlights look pretty impressive, so I have to go back and watch the game itself. Same thing with the Vikings and the Steelers. Steelers wiped the floor with the Vikings as well. Cardinals and the Colts, I did watch that game, and that was disgusting. I thought the Cardinals would demolish the Colts, at least on defense. I know their offense is struggling a little bit, but defensively, they still have a pretty solid defense, and I thought they would do a number on the Colts and Brissett at quarterback in his first start. And it just wasn't the case. Colts almost won that game, believe it or not, 16-13 in overtime. So not a good showing for either team. The Colts look better than they did last week, but it's hard to say. Considering how disappointing the Cardinals have been the last couple of years, so don't really know. Browns and the Ravens, another one that I was in and out of. Ravens dominated the Browns, didn't expect anything differently there. Pats and the Saints was one that I was definitely ready to watch. I thought it would be a better game than it was, but the Pats showed why week 1 wasn't really a thing. To be fair, though, they did play a pretty bad defense. Definitely one of the worst in the league. So you gotta take that into consideration. But I don't think the Saints weren't winning that game regardless. Even if last week never happened, they had no shot in winning that game. I would have picked them to win by 20 anyway. So they did win by 16. Pretty impressive game. Gronk dominated. Brady was like 30 of 39 for like 450 yards. He was out of his mind good. Defense was pretty solid. So pretty solid outing from the Pats. Like I said last week, if you were worried about them, you shouldn't have been. Eagles and the Chiefs. That one's I didn't watch the game. I heard a lot about it. Eagles apparently didn't look terrible. Again, all the games that I don't watch on Sunday, I do watch at some point during the week. But Sundays I pick between. Obviously, I watch my Titans, and then any fantasy-related games or any games that I've put money on, I'll watch those. or just any games that I'm particularly interested in. That one was not one that I was interested in, but Chiefs did pull out the win, 27-20 over the Eagles. So Chiefs are rolling 2-0. Titans and the Jags. Obviously, I watched that one. It was definitely a roller coaster of emotions because for like the first half, I didn't think the Titans were going to win that game. They looked terrible the first half of that game. It was 6-3 at halftime, and it just looked like one of those, in-division rival games that they were just going to lose again like they did last year at the end of the year. They just completely laid an egg against the Jags. This year they got the win early on like they did last year, so hopefully later in the year they don't lay another egg, because last year that cost them a playoff spot, because if they would have won that game, they would have been in the playoffs, won the AFC South. Probably wouldn't have been a good thing considering they had to play the Pats, but still. So good to see them bounce back from last week, 37-16. Not an overly impressive game by anyone. I mean, no one was, really super impressive. Mariota was solid, 215 yards, 15-27. Henry definitely did well. He almost ran for 100 yards on 15 or 14 carries. So he was pretty good. Murray was decent until he got hurt. And I have an ad playing in the background. That's awesome. Thank you. Go away. So I was happy. They didn't look bad the second half. They, from 6-3, it went 17 in the third quarter and 14 in the fourth quarter. So they bounced back. They definitely put the gas on in the second half. So it was nice to see that. Defense looked really good. They did give up 14 or 13 in the fourth quarter, but it was kind of a meaningless 13. So I'm not too worried about it. The Raiders blew the doors off the Jets, which I expected. They were one of my picks in fantasy, so if you did pick them up, anyone, you're welcome. Although I'm sure a lot of people, went with them. Derek Carr was outstanding as usual, 23 of 28 for like 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, so pretty solid game from him. Niners and Seahawks, a lot closer than it definitely should have been, which is, again, part of the reason why I'm not as terrified of them this year. So should be a solid game between them next week. Skins and the Rams, another one that I didn't watch. Skins won 27-20. Goff, I did watch the highlights though. Goff, I will tell you this. Goff definitely has the ability to play in the NFL. Now I think it's a matter of learning the offense, getting experience, I think now for him it's the mental part starting to really kick in. So we'll see. He definitely made some throws that were really good. He obviously made a terrible throw towards the end of the game that cost him the game. But he wasn't terrible, and I think that's good for the Rams because with them going to LA, people will lose interest quickly, especially if they aren't winning. So I think it's good that he was able to. He's been able to play pretty well so far. So good for Goff. I'm actually happy for them because for them to have the defense that they have, although I don't think it's going to pan out over the long haul, just because I think it's going to take a while for Goff to really get up to speed. But they're taking steps in the right direction. Let's put it that way. Packers and the Falcons. Not really much to say about that. A lot of people were really high on the Packers and the Falcons, actually. I'm actually not high on either one. I don't think the Falcons, I think, will make the playoffs just because I think they're the best team in that division. But I don't necessarily think they are the team they were last year. I think they'll make the playoffs, but I think they're going to get bounced before the Super Bowl. But at the same time, it's hard to say because the teams that I thought would be competing, and again, it is only 2 weeks, so it's hard to, I really don't want to put a judgment on it just yet. But through 2 weeks, the two teams that I thought would be competing to go to the Super Bowl in the NFC, the Seahawks and the Giants. The Seahawks, although they did get the win, definitely didn't look their best. And the Giants looked their absolute worst. Here's the thing. Here's my take on the Giants. They remind me a lot of They remind me a lot of teams in the sense that they are missing one piece from being a really legitimate contender. For example, the Houston Texans. No disrespect to Deshaun Watson, who I think has looked okay in his first 2 games, and I think will get better, obviously. But if you give that team a good, like an established good quarterback, like let's say they take a Drew Brees or like even an Eli Manning or like a Big Ben. I'm not talking like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. I think those two are in class of their own. But let's say like a Andrew Luck, a quarterback who could push them over there because their defense is legit, obviously. So the Giants to me are that same way, but just not with that quarterback. I think he's not great, but he's not bad. He's competent. He's Alex Smith, but better in terms of winning, to me. And when I make these comparisons, I never look at the mechanics or the stats or anything like that. I'm just talking about the results, and the results are the same for me. Alex Smith, not necessarily going to win you the game. Sometimes could lose you the game, but most of the times it's just he does his job. I think it's the same with Eli. Now, Eli can definitely lose you the game in a heartbeat. But Eli isn't like, he's not like Peyton or Tom Brady, where it's like, okay, we need to drive in the fourth quarter, or we need to come back in the second half, or we need to come out and score early in the first quarter. I don't depend on Eli to be that guy, right? Like, he's not going to carry you down the field. Now, Odell will, and obviously he has to throw the ball to Odell, but a lot of those touchdowns that he gets are catch and runs. So I think Eli is a serviceable, competent quarterback. I think he's just fine. I think he's just what the Giants need. But that offensive line, man, they are terrible. The Giants' offensive line is awful. And I mean, the one pass that Eli completed where the guy like grabbed his neck and he like broke 3 or 4 tackles, threw the ball down the field, got deflected. Somehow someone came down with, I think it was Shepard, and he got hit around the neck area. The guy just kind of grabbed him. He just looked lost out there. Dude, like there were so many plays where he dropped back and just immediately there was someone in his face. And part of that is his fault because at a certain point you have to realize, okay, look, my line is bad, so I need to get rid of the ball quickly. And I didn't think the Giants or the Lions defense was that good to hold down that many players. I mean, Brandon Marshall dropped a couple of big passes. Sterling Shepard dropped a tough touchdown catch that they ended up getting the field goal out of, which could have potentially turned the game. They almost went for it on 4th down, which that was stupid. And fortunately, for once, they got a penalty that probably made them second guess it and kick the field goal. There was a lot of boos from the crowd to make them go for it on 4th, and I think the better judgment came after the penalty. So the penalty probably helped them out in that case. But I think the Giants have a defense, and Janoris didn't play yesterday, so you have to take that into consideration. Janoris Jenkins did not play. He's obviously their best corner. And I think they have a Super Bowl team, but they don't have a Super Bowl offensive line. They don't even have a college offensive line. Their offensive line is terrible. Eric Flowers is garbage. Their whole offensive line is garbage. They can't run the ball. They went, and that was another thing. They got down to like the 3-yard line and tried to run it. And I get it. Like you're on, you got to get 2 or 3 yards. You would think in 2 or 3 plays, anyone could run for 2 or 3 yards. And I would have never, ever handed that ball off to anyone. And obviously I'm joking, but I would just cut all the running backs and just get a bunch of tight ends, big bodies, and all they would do is line up in the backfield like a running back and just pass block. They would just catch blitzers. That's it. It's something. They need to do something. Because the Lions team they beat yesterday, or that they lost to yesterday, isn't great. Now, the Lions are better than they have been in recent years, but they're definitely not great. And the Giants are 0-2 now, 0-1 in the division, 0-1 in the NFC. It's not looking good for them already. And if they don't get that offensive line addressed and get it addressed in a quick, timely manner, it's going to be a long, 6-10, 7-9 at best season for them. And that just, with that roster, that just would not be good. And lastly, the Cowboys and the Broncos, obviously the big game of the week. I was pretty disappointed, obviously, because I expected that game to be really, really good. It was really, really ugly, and it could have been uglier than it was, to be honest. None of it really concerns me necessarily because, again, it is week 2, and a lot of these teams, unless they're 0-2, I'm not overly concerned. And even the teams that are 0-2, I'm still not super concerned. The flag is in my hand, but it ain't raised yet. So Cowboys are 1-1. They got smoked by the Broncos, and I was impressed with the Broncos' defense. And that's the one thing that stood out to me about that game that I think is going to translate over the rest of the year. They gave up to last year's leading rusher a grand total of 8 yards on 9 carries. If I'm not mistaken, that's exactly what it was. I'm looking it up now just to be certain. Yes, 9 carries, 8 yards, less than a yard a carry, 0.9 yards per carry. And that's something that will translate no matter what. If they can carry that throughout the rest of the year, Simeon doesn't have to be great. He just needs to not lose them the game. Because if their defense plays like that for the rest of the year, no. If their defense plays like that and Simeon is not garbage, he doesn't lose them the game, they're going to be just fine. C.J. Anderson looked good. Even Jamal Charles looked pretty good. Demaryius Thomas was dominating. Trevor Siemian made some really good throws yesterday. And, of course, the defense was all over the place. The only shining moment, I guess, if there was one, was Dez Bryant caught the touchdown pass in a pretty convincing fashion over a nice corner. They're going to need that because if they can't run the ball, he's got to produce. And other than that, he really didn't produce that much. I think he had about 60 yards, 6 catches, and then that touchdown. You take that touchdown away, he had 6 catches for about 50 yards. So nothing really outstanding. Jason Witten, however, Mr. Reliable, what do you have, 10 catches for 97 yards? I need to pick him up in fantasy. Jesus. So, yeah, that's it. My overall thoughts so far, I think the league is actually a lot more balanced this year, and I said that going into the year. I think there's only 2 teams that are just bad. The Jets are terrible, and the Colts are awful. The Jets I expected to be terrible. The Colts, although I expected them to be bad, I didn't think they were this bad. The Bengals, although I still think the Bengals are going to bounce back, they just, for some reason, they just seem to be in it at the end of the year. Although this year, I don't know, the way they've looked the last 2 weeks, if they play anything like that going forward, they're not going to be anything to discuss. The Browns have actually looked okay. They didn't win yesterday. They didn't win week 1, but they don't look like the Browns anymore, if that makes any sense. Like they just look like a better team. They're not a better team in terms of winning, but they look like a better product on the field, and that's what counts because you have to start somewhere. The Bills, God, it seems more competitive. It really isn't, now that I think about it, because there's still 4 or 5 teams that are just, they may as well pack it up right now. So, I don't know. I loved it. I spent all day watching football. The only game that I tuned out of after a certain point was the Broncos and the Cowboys, just because it just got ugly really quick. So, pretty exciting season so far. I'll be back tomorrow for my fantasy stuff and my predictions for tomorrow night, or for Thursday night's game and the rest of the week. And in fact, I think I'm going to do that from now on. I don't know if I did any predictions for the last couple of games, but definitely going forward, I'll do that. So you guys take care. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.